afternoon and good morning or good evening, everyone. And thank you so much for tuning in today with us that tuned in a bit too early, actually. Whether you are joining us live or listening to the podcast of this first Insight series of the year. For those of you who do not know me, I am Pauline Vicard. I'm the co-founder and executive director of AdVini Global. And it will be my huge pleasure to be your host and guide the discussions today. If you don't know AdVini yet, AdVini is a research institute which is dedicated to the future of fine wine. That's quite a mouthful, but what we aim to do in a nutshell is to study the different forces of change. So including what is happening in the world of geopolitics or tech or gastronomy or luxury, and see how those forces of change are likely to impact the future of fine wine. And we do that through a diversity of formats, from organizing international think tanks to, putting together key market research. I've got to apologize for my voice because I've been talking a lot lately and it seems that it's getting a bit tired. So I hope it's not getting into understanding what I'm saying. You can follow us, of course, on all the major social media channels and subscribe to our newsletter if you want to know a bit more about what we are doing. And I'm thrilled to have this conversation today, our first Insight series of the year, as I was saying. Before we go straight into the conversation, a bit of rules of conversation. We want this session to be yours as much as possible. So of course I've prepped some questions, but please use the chat box as much as you want to comment and to react to everything that is said. And if you want to ask a particular question, you can also use the Q&A box so that I'm sure I'm not missing it, because sometimes the chat gets quite active and there's loads of comments. And to give you a bit of context on that conversation today, if everything had been going according to plan, we would have had this conversation live in Stellenbosch, with the incredible view that Edu's got behind him over the vineyards and the beginning of the harvest and everything. But life is what it is, and I'm thrilled to see so many of you tuning in from so many different countries. And whether we are in person or online, the question that we are going to discuss today remains so interesting. And just to explain, the way we chose to formulate the question today was a big parti pris, because to me, for quite a long time, we have been waiting for Africa to be ready for fine wine. We've been waiting in some ways for Africa to adapt to the wine industry to some extent. And today we chose to look at things a little bit differently and actually to reverse a bit the angle and to consider the incredible energy which is coming out of the African continent today, and see how could fine wine adapt to actually approach what seems to be incredible opportunities. And we're going to discuss that with the panel today. So in order to do so, I am thrilled to welcome Edu Heyns, who's the Strategic Development and Marketing Director for AdVini in South Africa. Chinedu, Rita, Rosa, again, very sorry for my French accent.
Love it.
Yeah, the CEO and founder of Vines by Rosa. And actually, Titi, you used to use the French accent because you are now based in Bordeaux, being originally from Nigeria and helping French wineries to export in Africa. So I'm looking forward to learn a bit more how the French people are considering the African market. And finally, we've got David White. Thank you so much, David, for being with us. And David, you're the general manager for Southern Africa and also the marketing director for Africa and the Middle East for Moet Hennessy. So that's quite a title as well. And thank you so much for being with us. And because we understand how definitions are important, I just wanted to give you two definitions to frame a bit the conversation today. We're going to talk about fine wine. So when I talk about fine wine, I usually refer to the AdVini definition of fine wine, which is, something which is quite large with 4 pillars, complex, balance, potential to age, but also something that provokes emotions and wonders, but also being the reflection of truth that the winemakers intended. So it's, again, quite a mouthful.
Yeah,
long story short, when we have to refer to fine wine as with a price, when we have to do like market research study, we use 30 euros ex seller. I mean, if we were in a European context, to give an idea of what we consider fine wine. And also we're going to talk about Africa, and I understand straight away that there's not one Africa. It's very, very diverse as a continent. And unless we specifically mention it, we will be focusing today on sub-Saharan Africa. So all of that southern part of Africa, without considering North Africa or the Middle East much, unless you've got questions, because people like David or Edu or Chichi also have knowledge about those regions too, but we're mainly going to focus on that. Well, that was quite a long introduction, so thank you. And I will actually like to stay on the definition part for the first part of this conversation, because I gave you very briefly our definition of what fine wine is at AdVini, but Edu and David, both of you working with international groups, I wanted to understand what your own company's definition of fine wine was, and how do they fit in your portfolio, and if you had different sales and marketing strategies when it came to fine wine compared to regular wines. David, do you want to take that first question and start with that?
Yeah, happy to do so, Pauline, and good afternoon, good evening, good morning, everybody, for wherever you're joining us in the world. Look, I might start with a contentious statement, I guess, which is that for Moet Hennessy, we include champagnes in the definition of fine wine, and we spend a lot of time with the Krugs and the Dom Perignons of the world trying to re-educate the consumer and the trade that actually the champagne flute, or even worse, the shallow coupe, are not the best glassware to be enjoying a fine wine that we have spent years making and aging, and that actually the right glass, predominantly from Riedel, of course, but there are others, will actually absolutely help the aroma and the bouquet and the subtleties of that champagne product, that fine wine product, come across to you as well. So for us, it's a pretty broad definition, Pauline. We tend to use a price bracket. If I go to widely available sources, we'd be looking at a similar level as yourself, above 30 euros. That's where IWSR, the global database for wines and spirits, would start to be terming things as ultra premium and moving towards prestige. To be the broadest definition that we would align to. That allows us to know we're speaking consistent language across markets, across territories. It's a common point of definition that we can leverage back to the trade, back to journalists, and so on and so forth. So that's probably about as tightly as we ever define it. On a looser definition, actually, we tend to define it based on what the consumer is looking for and what the consumer is willing to pay. And again, there's going to be a certain level of spend in that, but for some consumers, perhaps with tighter wallets, a fine wine could be absolutely at that 25, 30 euro entry point, whereas a consumer who is a little more experienced, is enjoying the finer things in life more regularly, probably would be beginning to think they need to spend a bit more or be going after exclusive vintages, exclusive vineyards. So in its loosest sense, we almost allow the consumer to help us define what they understand by fine wine. And again, if I started with a semi-contentious statement, let me finish my first blurb with one as well, which is, for us, Moet and Chandon Brut Imperial could be defined as a fine wine. And I know that not everybody would agree with that, but at times, for certain consumers, that could be the epitome of luxury and good taste. And certainly when you look at the Grand Cru vineyards and the Premier Cru vineyards that make up Moet and Chandon, you could argue that that also could belong in the definition.
Yeah, so I suppose at Moet Hennessy, the portfolio you work with are exclusively fine wine according to both those definitions. Edu, how does it work for you? How do you consider fine wine, and how do you differentiate them with the rest, if you do differentiate them?
Both in South Africa and in France, AdVini focuses very much on terroir-focused wines. And for AdVini South Africa, the wines that we view as fine wines are all exclusive, very site-specific wines. So yes, there is a price bracket that you can use as a means of defining a fine wine. But for us, it's also about site-specific. This that word, you know what I want to say, and the exclusivity that also goes with that.
Well, and you've been, traveling and selling wine through. So I'm gonna use SSA, which is Sub-Saharan Africa, just because I can't pronounce the second word. So I'm just gonna go for SSA for many years. And I wanted to, to continue with your perspective on this part of the continent when it comes to fine wine, and how big is Africa in terms of sales for AdVini South Africa in particular, and have you seen the continent changed in the last 5 years? What's your perspective on Africa?
Thank you, Pauline. You mentioned it earlier, but it's a difficult one to speak about Africa as a market because it is so vast, it is so diverse. It comprises 48 countries on the mainland with 6 islands added to that. And it's so diverse in terms of the market as well. Some markets are mostly driven by tourism. I take Botswana as an example. They've got beautiful lodges in Botswana, high-end lodges where fine wine is served. But the population of Botswana is very small. So it's 2 very different markets if you look at it in that way. And it's also different in terms of the geographic area where it is. In East Africa and Southern Africa, it is much easier to sell a South African wine than it is to sell in West Africa, where France dominates. I can see you nodding, David. And therefore it's a complex market. It is a diverse market. In terms of the importance of Africa for AdVini South Africa, I can explain it in 2 different ways. It already represents a significant part of our sales. But what is important to note is that it is also a very important strategic growth market for AdVini South Africa. A lot of resources are going into it, a lot of time is going into it. And one thing that is incredibly important for Africa and the development of the fine market is that we travel to Africa very regularly. We use the term takkies op teer, takkies on top, walking those sidewalks. You have to be in the markets. Another one that we use is liquid on lips. You have to serve these wines, present tasting. I'm not really fond of the term, well, let me put it in another way. I think wine education should be understood in a different way. It shouldn't be a forced education. It should be an enjoyment. But with that education comes and a keener interest comes. And back to your initial question, it represents a significant part of our sales. But if you look at where we want to go, it should represent an even more significant part of our sales. I went back and looked at South African wine exports from South Africa to Africa at a price point that is higher than 200 rand, which is the highest price bracket that the statistics organization categorizes it.
200, you're saying
200
rand? Yeah.
Okay, and the top 5 markets for Africa, for South Africa in the fine wine category are Nigeria, Kenya, Zimbabwe, Tanzania, and Ghana. And I guess that could have looked a bit different if it wasn't for COVID, because COVID played a very important role in showing us what the real African markets are if you take away tourism. And if you look at those 5 markets 5 years ago compared to 2020, Nigeria, Kenya, and Zimbabwe showed growth in the fine wine category, while Tanzania and Ghana both declined a bit. So if you look at the AdVini picture, in 5 years' time, we would like to have a bigger representation in Africa. We've definitely provided resources and budget to grow the market in Africa. and we see huge potential. But the size of the prize in terms of Africa, there are certain countries where you are able to sell fine wine. In some countries, it is also very limited in terms of the fine wine potential.
Thank you. David, you, before managing Africa, you worked in Asia and notably in Singapore. And the first question that I asked you, and I really like this one, but are there any common points between Singapore and the sub-Saharan African market at all? Is there anything that you've learned in Singapore that can be, useful where you are now?
Well, you did ask me this in our pre-chat, Pauline, and I struggled then, and I've had a few days to think about it, and I'm still struggling. But I have found one pretty interesting point of similarity. We use a source called Knight Frank Wealth Report to help us determine the number of ultra high net worth individuals or high net worth individuals. I know there's also the Afra Wealth Report. Discovered from Knight Frank that the ultra high net worth, which is the $30 million disposable income limit, there are 3,700 ultra high net worths in Singapore, and there are 3,300 in all of Africa. So there are similar pools of target consumers for the very high-end fine wine. I came down a notch to the millionaire statistics as well, Pauline, and there are 245,000 millionaires in Singapore and 231,000 in Africa. So there's a similarity for you. We've got a similar target consumer base for fine wine across the whole of the continent as what I had to target in Singapore. Singapore, I think, is around about 700 square kilometers of landmass. And I think the continent of Africa, Ida, you're probably going to know better than me, but I think it's something like 30 million square kilometers. So, it's a 40,000 times bigger geography with a similar number of target consumers for the high-end fine wine portfolio that we're talking about today. So I think this is a topic we're going to get into, Pauline. The challenges that provides in terms of finding those consumers in a concentrated way or in a way that's efficient becomes incredibly challenging. And that is the biggest difference that I had between Singapore and the concentration in Singapore meant that I could host a dinner, prepare some very nice food in a high-end restaurant with a portfolio of our wines, and I would have 50 to 60 potential consumers and customers there in front of me. To replicate that on the continent of sub-Saharan Africa is a little more challenging, or it's a much more individualistic one-on-one approach.
Yeah, and you also told me, and I hope I can share that, but actually Singapore, the tiny island of Singapore, is more important in terms of sales today that the whole continent of Africa is in terms of sales from what Hennessy, right?
It was probably the proportion of high-end, the mix, the proportion of high-end products in our total sales that I was referring to.
Okay. Yeah.
We would be selling more in Africa than Singapore, but of course we have a full portfolio of spirits brands that would be generating a lot more business for us in Africa than they would have been in Singapore.
Oh yeah, so it's when we were talking about the highest brand like the Clos d'Ambonnet and all the Krug Special Cuvée. Okay.
Yes, we would be selling, I think I'll need to double check my statistics afterwards, but I don't think I'd be out of kilter to say we probably sold more Krug in Singapore than we sell in Africa.
Okay. Chichi, we've called this Inside series voluntarily, Is Fine Wine Ready for Africa? And you're based in France, you work with French estates. And my first question for you was, do you think the European fine wine market and the French one in particular, because that's the one that you know best, understand Africa's opportunity enough and understand what Africa is today compared to what they think Africa is? Is there a difference there?
Okay, thanks, Pauline. Hello, guys. Thank you. It's such a pleasure to be talking to each and every one of you here. And Ido, David, Ido, I understand where you're coming from. You said exactly what I expected from you. David, I am a little bit surprised. I would love to share your statistics with you.
About the numbers
because-
of wealthy people?
Yes,
do you mean?
not just
Yeah.
of wealth, not just of wealth. I'm just thinking of the whole entire Africa having the same sales point with Singapore. I have been to Singapore. I have friends from Singapore, and I know a lot of multi-millionaires. It's a small island, but it's an island of millionaires. Let's just put it
Yeah.
that way. It's not an island for a poor man. It's not an island for an ordinary man. So I totally get it. But the comparison was a little bit sat uneven with me. I felt a little bit uncomfortable with that because we're talking about Singapore, where if you're not a millionaire, you cannot have an apartment in Singapore. It's really, really expensive. So that being said, David, I would like to talk to you about that later. And when it comes to Nigeria, sorry, Pauline, I digress because I was just
No, that's okay. No, don't worry.
in my head. So what we're talking about now, when it comes to Africa and fine wine, can you give me the question again? Because
Well,
really...
I was wondering, with you being based in Bordeaux now and working with all the top estate that you're working with, I just wanted to understand if to you there was a difference between what you see of the African fine wine market and what the French in particular understand of the French wine market. And is there a need to work on, you know, that understanding? Do French people understand the opportunity that Africa is offering at the moment, and do they think about it the right way?
Well,
from your point of view?
when you say thinking about it the right way, I don't think any businessman without, like, if you don't have plans, you can't even think straight, because Africa is like a blanket. You know, they just feel like there's something covering this continent. It's always regarded as strange. It's dangerous. It's on, you just don't know what's going to happen. Yes, this is what a country or a continent is that has been, how would you say, in the fine wine business, we are new, but we do have amazing, you know, group of people who are educated and who love fine wine, who have been exposed to fine wine. Nigeria, I would talk about my country,
Yeah.
which is about 200, we are about 1/3 of the population of Africa. And I'm very proud to say that when it comes to fine wine, we have a huge market in Nigeria. Like David, I'm sure you can attest to that. When it comes to champagne, when it comes to AdVini products, very lovely. I'm very happy to see you guys in South Africa. That's a very good investment and a good plan. Then when it comes to the French, recognizing and understanding the African continent, it's always been difficult because there's always this barrier keeping them from really coming into the market. Just come into the market, getting to know the people, getting to understand, why would I spend my hard-earned naira for a bottle of wine, which I would buy ex-seller price here in France for 30 euros, and a Nigerian will have to pay 90 euros for that same bottle of wine.
So it's a bit what Ido said at the beginning, is that it's a very interesting market if you're willing to put the time and the resources and really commit to that. Would that be the first advice that you give to the French estate that are considering working with Nigeria?
The first thing I do as a Nigerian living here in France, working in the wine business for over 22 years, the first thing I say to any friend of mine, even just a friend, have you ever been to Nigeria? Have you ever been to Africa? Have you ever had cost to just go for a visit? I'm not talking of just going to the office, or going to the hotel, being locked in the hotel and staying in the hotel and talking to people at dinners. Have you ever felt the real meaning of being in Africa, which is very, very rare, I have to say. And if you do not do that, there is no way you can understand the continent. There's no way you can sell to the people. It doesn't work that way. And this is one of the things I try to explain to my friends here who are winemakers, who are wine negotiators. I tell them, you need to have a broader, your mind has to be more open to the people you're selling your products to. You have to know them. I cannot sell something to you that you like. If I don't know you, I don't even know the approach to take. What is the approach to take for an African to be interested in spending his money? We can buy beer. Beer is much more convenient for us. It's better for our climate. It's easier. It's cheaper. So why would I want to spend that extra money for a glass of wine? Why? So you need to be able to give this person who is going to spend this money a reason why. Why should I? Why should I? I would rather drink a bottle of Star. If you drink the Star and the Stout in Nigeria, they are delicious. So for people to go to deviate from that, you need to come closer. You need to come closer. You need to work harder at your approach.
You do. I see you shaking your head and actually agree with what she's saying. Can you tell us a bit more about, you know, the consumers and how localized you need to be in your approach and the different behaviors and expectation that you can see?
So I googled African beer consumption before the session, and in 2019, which was the most recent legit figure that I found, it was 23.3 billion beers. And I think that I'm speaking wine here, not necessarily fine wine.
Yeah.
Wine needs to dig into that potential, into that market potential. If we can just get a fraction of that, we've come a long way. And the question relates to fine wine consumers and some stories about them so that you can relate and understand how it works. And I mentioned tourism earlier, so I wrote down 5 different kind of customers that buy our fine wines. The first one is the tourism example. I mentioned Botswana earlier. Wilderness Safaris was the first photo safari group in Africa. They started a lodge in Botswana. It grew, it became very high end. And today, if you go to Wilderness Safaris, everything is included, and it always includes fine wine. And that is the most beautiful customer to have, because every client gets exposed to your product. And it's a wonderful means of bringing African wines to an African safari. And you mentioned in our pre-discussion the part of local products for the local market in Africa. And in our case, the wines that we sell to Wilderness Safari Group are the single block Pinotage and the single block Chinedu, because that's authentic South African fine wine in a very authentic safari setting. The second example, and this is to me a very, very exciting example, and it is something that developed because of COVID, is the D2C channel. And we have a client in Angola that has an amazing database of people that want high-end products. This is caviar, it's cigars, it's fine wine, it's champagne. And they basically send out the products for the week, they get ordered, they get delivered. And it's an amazing channel in a country where, when you look at the different countries in terms of tourism and not tourism, Angola doesn't have a lot of tourism. Those people that consume wines are the locals. And for me, this was one of the revelations of the COVID period. We opened this market through this club, and it was significant and great because it is very targeted. And I think that's one of the lessons. It's a targeted approach, which you really need to have in Africa. Then David also mentioned dinners and events earlier. We've got a partner that we work with in Zambia, Cam Fine Wines, and the business is built on events. It was started by a restaurateur that was part of the team at Trump's Grill House, which is a restaurant on Nelson Mandela Square in Sandton. And he was able to get a network of African people that come to Johannesburg for business and dine at his restaurant. And now he makes a living of presenting fine wine events throughout Africa. And it's an amazing channel, and it is amazing to see how these luxury products are just valued. I love working in Africa because of the excitement that you get in Africa.
Yeah.
The real appreciation. And with Cam Wines, that's an example of where you have a targeted approach, you do an event and you sell your wines through that. Again, bringing an experience in fine wines, which is very, very important for the African market. Then we've got the Lavanier cellar door. Now, the picture behind me is Lavanier, that's the single block Pinotage vineyard. We've got a wonderful cellar door experience, and it has happened a couple of times that people come to the cellar door and they would simply order 2 or 3 pallets delivered directly to their doorstep.
Mm-hmm.
We have a Kenyan customer that has become a regular after ordering his first pallet. We've got Nigerian customers that we managed to get in that way, and that is an interesting way for us to engage with people because, and this is a very important thing for the South African wine industry. People are increasingly traveling to Cape Town to go on holiday, and they're visiting the estate. And again, using the word experience, they get the experience of a wine estate. They fall in love. They order a pallet, and it's beautiful business. And those are some of the interesting channels that I've managed to sort of.
But Ido, you know, this is one of the things that I explained to you're in South Africa. This is Bordeaux. These are regions where there are vineyards, there are chateaus, there are places for people to have these experiences. Now, when you talk about France and Nigeria or Ghana, Liberia, Angola, all these other countries where they are quite far. Okay, so the experience is very, very expensive. So what I would advise and what I say to most fine wine makers or people who really want to come to business in West Africa especially is you need to bring yourself there, or and you take people with you. No. And this is what we're doing. The bridge between South Africa and Nigeria is quite close. And this is why I have a lot of Nigerian friends who actually own vineyards in South Africa. I have South African friends who are winemakers, and it's the easiest way to experience this. And it's actually the easiest. But at the same time, here in France, and this is why I get a little bit frustrated when I explain the importance of the French reaching out and bringing their customers closer to them.
And that's the perfect tie-in to one of the questions that I had for David. Thank you, Chinedu, because David, part of your job is to ensure that you're working with international houses and maisons, and you've got those global strategy and programs, and part of your job is to make them relevant to the local consumers. Can I ask you what it means on a practical level? Can you give us an example of how you've adapted some of your international programs to make them relevant for the SSA consumers in various countries?
Yeah, absolutely, Pauline. And look, if you go back, gosh, what's the time frame going to be? Let's say at least a decade, probably 2 decades, if I'm going to be safe. The old days of aspiration purely towards a Western brand are long gone. The American consumer is acutely aware of their position in the world, the local pride that they have in where they come from and their own nationality is incredibly strong. And if a brand is trying to market in an old world format of, this is Western aspiration, then you are not going to go very far very quickly. And it's a horrible phrase that only a marketeer could come up with. And it's a bit of a cliche. Ultimately, globalization. So taking a global brand strength and ensuring that it's localized and made relevant for each of the African consumers. You know, all agreed there is no such thing as Africa, which is a mistake that a lot of people make elsewhere in the world. We have to ensure that whichever brand from our portfolio we're talking about is tailored towards the Ghanaian consumer, the Kenyan consumer, the South African consumer. And that is, in its simplest form, ensuring that those consumers are represented in the communication. Even today, if you go onto some of our brands' websites, I would be slightly embarrassed as the representative for Africa that you will see a sea of Western images and Westernized consumers. However, the brands that have begun to embrace the opportunity in Africa, you will begin to see a much stronger proportion of African representation, be that consumers or be that influencers. And we talked, Pauline, about, you know, Africa's position in the globe is stronger today than it's ever been. And I am absolutely a passionate believer that over the next 5+ years, it is just going to get stronger and stronger, because whether we're talking fashion, whether we're talking music, whether we're talking culinary skills, all of these elements are being discussed by consumers and by companies ultimately for the first time. And therefore that vibrancy, that passion of local African culture, local African talent, that needs to be showing up in the communication and the reflection that the brand gives to an African consumer. And if you can do that, and if you can bring those cultures into your brand mix, I'm talking like a marketeer, apologies, but if you can reflect that with accuracy and with a genuine nature, then you've got a chance. The best recipe for success, Pauline, that we find, and forgive me, Chinedu, I'll go to the Nigerian profile, is a Nigerian consumer loves a brand that is big on the global stage. It reflects a certain amount of status and iconography, but it has to have been discovered by the Nigerian people. It has to be relevant for a Nigerian consumer. It has to reflect their lifestyle and what they're interested in. And if you get that right, and the best example we have in our portfolio is Hennessy Cognac. When you get that right, then the success story is phenomenal. And we're beginning to experience that with our champagne portfolio. We've got a long way to go with our still wines portfolio. We're at the beginning of our journey with some of our finer still wine houses. But ultimately, it's that balance, and that's my job, is to ensure that the voice of the African consumer, but also the voice of the African talent is heard in our thinking going forward.
And so thank you so much, David, and to link everything, because you've mentioned since the beginning that, you know, the spread of consumer, the fact that consumers are spread across the continent, the fact that it's really diverse and complex. And we've mentioned, Ido's mentioned DTC as well, and direct consumer, and we can't ignore COVID, of course. And I was wondering the role that you see digital play and online selling playing in both, you know, reconnecting us with COVID time, but also in easing the fact that people are so spread out into a huge continent. How do you see this playing, David, and how is it playing for you already? And then I'll have the same question for both of you, Ido and Gigi.
Look, it's critical and vital, Pauline, and I think it's really the only way to succeed in the near term. It allows you to target, it allows you to build relationships. You know, we all know the technology that allows you to target right consumer profiles, or to start collecting consumer information and build that relationship with them online. It arguably for me is also part of what I termed to you in our pre-chat, the leapfrog generation. And if you just look at the penetration of smartphones across Africa, SIM cards, mobile devices, you know, there's something just over 1 billion consumers in Africa. There's 1.2 billion mobile phone connections. So there are more phones per head. And when you consider, you know, graphics and the economics of Africa, that's quite startling. But when you go to Chinedu's earlier point, you travel around the streets of Tanzania, you get stuck in Nigeria, you're trying to cross Lagos and you're in the back of a bus, a taxi, a car for 4 hours. you are on your mobile device and you are consuming your TV programs, you are consuming your music, you are doing your work, you're consuming your podcasts, and therefore, if you are not present on that channel, frankly, you haven't got a hope in hell. And it's a truism of marketing today, but I think within Africa, it's amplified tenfold. We have to embrace that.
Is that a way also, because we know, and we can't ignore that White Hennessy is a big company with resources, notably in marketing and in sales, that might not be accessible to most, and certainly not to more boutique size producers. And that's one of the questions also that I had for the panel is Africa at that stage of that development only for bigger size companies that can handle the spread out of consumers, or can smaller wineries also succeed, and how? Chichi, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, because I personally have worked with very small brands that are really doing very well compared to Hennessy, Moet, you know, people have the big brands, but then we do have clients who do not want to hear any name. We have those few really, really educated and very, I don't know, they have savoir-faire, they know what they want. They don't care about the name, and I actually I deal mostly with fine wines, and these are the people, they don't want to know about the name. They want to have the best. They don't want a big brand. They don't want a big commercial brand. They want the small chateau, small vineyard that makes really exquisite product that they just want on their table every time, and they're ready to pay for it. Okay, so those small brands, yes, they do have opportunities. And actually, those little brands, they're doing quite well, because I know a couple of them who have their own export representative in Nigeria, living in Nigeria, living in Ghana, working gently. No, there's no need for aggressiveness. There's no need for too much marketing, but they go one-on-one with their clients, and they're doing amazingly well. And that's happening more and more, because people are really checking what they are drinking nowadays. It's not just about the name.
There was a question in the chat. Thank you, Sarah, for that question, on trying to understand if there was any key difference, David, between the strategy for your still and for your sparkling wines. Do you sell them the same way in Africa, or do you sell them differently?
Look, it starts to build on what Chinedu was just saying, and ultimately I represent a wide portfolio, and each part of the portfolio requires a different approach. And I think all of the attendees, listeners on this call will know champagne tends to be more of a brand orientated category. Still have an incredibly fine product at its core, but consumers are more open to branded messages in champagne. And we all know the appeal and kudos of an Armand de Brignac or a Dom Perignon, for example. But to Chinedu's point, when you come to fine wine, there's almost an inverse reaction to a big brand. People are looking for product intrinsics, for the quality of the process, of the name of the winemaker, and therefore the approach has to be individual. And whether we're talking Clos de Menil from Krug, or whether I'm talking Cheval des Annes, if you are not building a one-to-one approach and a one-to-one relationship for what is going to be a relatively high-priced sale, then again, it's unlikely to succeed. So in short, the answer to the question is yes. For our still wines portfolio, we would be more concentrated on that personal relationship. We have a network of what we call private client managers within Moet Hennessy, whose role and responsibility is to build the one-to-one relationships, and sometimes through some of the third-party partners that Edo was referencing earlier. But more often than not, it's direct to consumer, and that arguably is the future model for all of us. You know, the power of today's decision making lies with consumers, not with big brands.
Exactly.
And if we're not awake to that in companies like Moet Hennessy, we will fail in the long-term future. You know, the days of Procter & Gamble and 1950s marketing are a long way behind us. So we are in a state of evolution. Our portfolio is broad enough to allow us to be very nimble and agile and do both ends of the equation, depending on whether we're talking a premium spirit or a luxurious still wine product. But yes, there are vast differences that Chinedu referenced and that hopefully I built on.
Edu, I wanted to, thanks so much, David. Edu, I wanted to bounce a bit on what you've said at the very beginning about education and how you can't force education on people, but I can't remember the end of the sentence, but that was a very promising sentence. And I wanted to know a bit more about education and what role it has to play, because it's always a big debate in the fine wine world. Do you have to educate people, or do people have to be educated to appreciate fine wine? And if so, what kind of education is relevant? And I wanted to ask that question in the context of Africa.
I'm going to just latch onto the discussion about social media earlier. Every market is different, but one thing that I always enjoy in Kenya in particular, and David mentioned leapfrogging earlier, and Kenya was such an interesting example of leapfrogging certain bank systems when they started with mobile banking. And
we can't hear you very well. I'm sorry, Edu. I think you're breaking out.
The mountains around Stellenbosch have obviously.
Yeah.
I was just going to say.
Very sorry.
After every Kenyan tasting, I need. Okay, so after every tasting can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, you're back. Sorry, you
Okay.
disappeared for a second.
All right. After every tasting in Kenya, I immediately check our Instagram page, because compared to other countries, the amount of follows that you get at a tasting is just remarkable. It's basically the same as the attendance. And I don't get social media orders on a direct message in Europe or in
You broke up again. Itu, maybe you can turn off your video. We're going to miss seeing you.
Yeah.
It's amazing. Okay, is that better?
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes,
Okay.
sorry, we can't benefit from your smile, but at least we can hear you, which is
Can you just tell me where I broke up? Did I mention the?
So you were mentioning that in
Social media
Kenya,
followers.
yeah, you had loads of social media followers in Kenya, and I think you were saying that you had direct sales from social media in Kenya as well. Something
So
that you were not
essentially, at a tasting in Kenya, you're likely to get the number of follows that equates to the number of people in attendance, and you're likely to get orders on direct messages on Instagram, and that doesn't really happen in other markets. And I think social media and digital channels are so exciting in terms of educating in a fun way. And I think that is a very interesting way to get into the African market. And that is a key way of educating. When we think of education, we tend to think of WSET. And that is incredibly important. But I'm not convinced that everyone in Africa will immediately be overly keen to sort of start studying wine. It's more a case of having a fun experience, getting into it. And when you get into it, we all know it happened to us as well. The more you get into wine, the more you want to learn about wine, and eventually you start educating yourself by attending tastings, attending events, and getting into it. And to me, that is the future of education for Africa. And I also just want to tie back into the one example that I didn't mention when we discussed different consumers. And that's one of the fun things about Africa. Zimbabwe is, as you saw in the statistics that I cited earlier, an important market for South Africa. But our distributor in Zimbabwe will sell anything from crocodile tails to frozen cakes, but also fine wines. And we're able to present a basket to expose people to new wines. And that basket is also a nice means of getting something like wine and food pairings across. where you buy a basket of fine products. And for instance, we've done this with Camp Fine Wines, where you get a cigar and a pinotage, and that's a pairing. And that's a way of sort of getting into understanding wines and appreciating wines. And also education comes with that.
And David, I've got to ask you, following up what Idu's just said, because Idu just said we've got to educate people with fun experience that can bring other things than wine. Well, you might Hennessy, so you also have the other part of LV, which is Louis Vuitton. Are we going to see more bridges between the LV and the MH in terms of marketing and experience, and having, you know, bags and champagne nights, or, you know, a very cliche because I can't think about anything but the Louis Vuitton bag at the moment, being in Paris. But are you going to mix both hands and both ends of your company?
Look, I'd rather start the answer to that question, Pauline, with the fun elements. And what Edu was saying was, recently we did just a short video clip pairing jollof rice with Moet and Chandon nectar.
Stop that! Stop that, David! You've just taken my idea. How did you get that?
And it was you know, a chef from I think it was from Zena restaurant in Lagos.
I did that with him.
Was in
Very good.
And we just filmed a 2-minute clip. Our winemaker Benoit Guez trying jollof rice for the first time.
He's in trouble.
Quite a shock. And the chef enjoying the sweetness of a nectar imperial with
Exactly.
That was fun. I mean, who's ever thought about pairing?
I have done that, my darling.
Yeah.
I've been doing that for 20 years. And this is, it's one of the reasons why my private club, the Wine Tasters in Nigeria, we have been pairing wines and champagnes with akara, with plantains, with suya, with pepper sauce, everything Nigerian. Actually, February, I'll be hosting another wine tasting, food and wine pairing with Nigerian foods here in Paris.
Well,
So this is something I've been doing for over 20 years. I started it in Lagos, and it's one of the things I was just going to say that one of the things this is a free advice from me, and you have just said it. If you go on my YouTube channels, you will see we've been doing pairing with jollof rice, fried rice. I go to chateaus here. This is another reason why I love the fact that when you meet winemakers who are ready to take that step, they are asking questions. So I actually cook in the chateau, Nigerian food.
Wonderful.
And we pair it with your wines.
Wonderful.
And that's super interesting what you're saying also, Chichi, because I think, you know, African food, which I understand doesn't mean much, but the food from various the various countries of Africa haven't been exported maybe as much as other food in a global level. And I think we are at that section where African chefs are really taking their food outside and also bringing them to an international stage. And that's super interesting to have people like you, David, that have started working with pairing.
We need people like David. We need people like David. We need people like Idu, because this has been going on for quite a while. And if you tell a Frenchman, oh, you're going to try egusi soup. Egusi soup is one of the most popular dish in Africa as a whole, and is one of the most delicious. And people say, how can I eat egusi soup? Because there's palm oil in it. How can I have egusi soup with red wine? And then I have to break it down, the kind of wine you would use so that it's easier to break down the fats, because it's all palm oil. And this is how you get Nigerians and Africans to try your wines and enjoy it, because they can finally, we love our food. We would never stop eating African food. We would never. Like there was an event we went to recently where we had the ministers from Nigeria, we had the president there, and they were all asking me, Kilele, this means, what is this? Chichi, what is this? And I'm like, it's foie gras. And he looked at me and he said, girl, you better go bring food from your house because I'm not eating this. And these are the people you want to sell your wines to. They are very rich, but at the same time, they are grounded in their culture. They want their food and they want to be able to drink your wines with what they eat. So how does that happen? You have to find a way to get those wines that pair with Nigerian foods and African foods. And, that's the education, I think. That's where the education comes in. You educate them on what to have with what.
Idu, I see your hand is raised, and we can take a quick comment. I just want to prep the other panelists because we only have 5 minutes left. And while Idu is making his comments, I'd like to ask you all, if we look at tomorrow, if we look at the future, maybe the next 5 years, I want to ask you all three what you think the levers of growth are going to be and the trends that we need to look at carefully in order to make the most of the opportunities that are coming in the next 5 years. So you think about that, Titi and David, and Idu, if you want to do your comment and then maybe start with the question about the future.
Sure. While we're discussing food pairings, and tell me if I break up again, I think it's important to mention African sommeliers. I see that South Africa's very own rockstar sommelier Tinashe is online. And yes, and he's from Zimbabwe. And we need those sommeliers that they understand the markets, they understand food, they understand wine, they bring everything together. And I think, well, the next question is about the future. These guys are so important to take fine wines forward on this continent. That's my answer.
If you haven't seen, or if you're not aware of the documentary, which is called Blind Ambition, which Tinashe is part of, please go and research it, because also it's such a good way to understand Africa and to understand the challenge of being a sommelier there, and to understand the challenge of getting education, access to wine and everything. Yeah. And congratulations again, Tinashe, for all the prize that you winning with that documentary. David, your levers of growth and trends that we need to follow up for the future of fine wine in SSA.
Gosh, look, if only I had a crystal ball, Pauline. Future projections are always challenging. Yeah. I'll stay with a consistent theme, and then I will leapfrog to one other. So I'll approach the question two ways. I think the first one, building on what we were just talking about, is about brand associations and partnerships with other entities across Africa. So the more that fine wine producers can find sister associations that allow them access to the right consumer, the easier it's going to be. And these consumers, we've all considered over the last hour, they're enjoying fine art, they're enjoying fine cooking moments, they're going to the lodges that Ado referenced earlier. And I think finding the right partners and approaching those, and that would be my answer to the question you gave earlier about LVMH associations. Possibly, if it's right for that LV brand to come into the continent, then yes, they may partner with one of the Moet Hennessy products. But we would treat that to a certain extent the same as any other third-party relationship. I do think the trend that I alluded to briefly earlier of African cultural resonance in the world is only going to get stronger, and I think there's still an opportunity for fine wines to get in early. That we sometimes refer to first mover status. There's still a huge opportunity here that's untapped. If you get in early with the right associations, I think there's a commercial opportunity. But whether, again, we're talking, gosh, I could choose from 100 names. Let me go to the fact that over the last 3 years, the LVMH prize has been awarded to 2 South Africans, and in the 3rd year, a South African was in the finalist. So the fact that these young designers are now fighting on an equal footing with designers from the USA, from Europe, from Asia, those trends are only going to get stronger. And that's why we talk about Africa being the continent of tomorrow. Actually, it's the continent of now. as I said, the vibrancy and the impact of Africa is today. Find those associations, talk to these people, build relationships, and you will have a better chance of success. Long way to the first part. Second part, I'll make shorter. The other trend is, I think, going to be that leapfrog generation. Ado referred to mobile money, mobile bank accounts. This consumer is not going to go through the same paths as the Western consumer, be it media trends, be it banking trends, be it social media trends. And I think the advent of Web3, the potential of cryptocurrencies in Africa, the opportunity for young consumers here to seize those fintech opportunities and to get into new technologies that the rest of the world is just waking up to. I think that will accelerate here much faster than in established countries where you've got to unpick the past and unlearn history before you move forward. I think Africa will seize that in an entrepreneurial and innovative way, the consumers and the entrepreneurs in this region. So those would be two strands that I would potentially keep watch on for the future.
Yeah, true.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, David.
Kiki?
That's beautifully said. Thank you, David, because that is absolutely true. I was in the banking industry before I went into wine. And one of the things that really excites me is the fact that our financial industry it's one of the most flexible in the world. Like, there is nothing that cannot be done in seconds. I was sitting down here in Bordeaux and I made sales of over $50,000 in a week just by sending messages to clients. Hey, do you want this? Listen, this is available. Chichi, are you in Lagos? No, I'm not in Lagos, but it's there. And they were making their orders. And like you said, people send you Instagram messages. Oh, madam, where can I get this? This is Africa for you. We don't have that thing called, oh, you have to be proper. No, I want something. I'm going to ask you, how can I get it? Where can I get it? Can I pay for it right now? It's quick. It's fast. The youth 2050, Nigeria is going to be Africa. It's going to be 26% of the world population. It's astounding. And we're talking about over 50% of these people are going to be less than 30 years.
Yeah.
Where else in the world would you have that kind of dynamic population? And this is what, for me, the most important thing is to look at the youth. Because now we say, you know, here in the UK, the older people are the ones drinking fine wines, but not in Africa. In Africa, you have young people, educated, with money. Even if they don't have money, they are pushing hard. They want to be, I want to be that person. And that's the pleasure of talking to them. When you go to Nigeria, when you go to Africa, and you're talking to young people about wine, they are not asking you the, you know, tell me about the soil, tell me about the terroir, I want to know. No, none of that. They want to know, what would this do for me as a person, as somebody looking at me? What is it for me? Yeah. And this, once they get it, they are going to be your client. And we're talking about people that are 30 years old. So you're talking about another 40 years, and their kids are going to grow up seeing them drink fine wines. And what's going to happen? It's a trend. And imagine the numbers. Africa is where it is at. If you don't know that, I feel sorry for your business, because you are just not going to get anywhere. It's true.
So I think it's the perfect like joint conclusion. Africa is now, and if you don't know this, I'm sorry for you. That's the perfect conclusion to the webinar today. Well, thank you so much, Chichi, David, and Idu, for being with us today. Thank you all in the attendance.
Can I say thank you to somebody here? Nkechi, thank you so much. This is one of the ladies from Friends of Nigeria who is hosting the food and wine tasting, Nigerian food and wine tasting happening in Paris.
Well, send me the information.
Yeah, I will.
And thank you also for staying with us. Sorry for the little sound problem we had through the webinar. Thank you for staying with us until the end. And there will be a recap of that session. There will be a podcast made of that session. If you don't follow us, please be a bit more Kenyan and follow us on social
Be
media.
Nigerian, follow us.
Sign up for the newsletter, and we'll see you very soon on another key topic for the future of fine wine. Thank you, everyone. Have a safe and
It
healthy
was a
evening.
pleasure meeting everybody. Thank you so
Likewise.
much.
Bye.
Thank you,
Oh,
Pauline.
cheers.
Thank you.
Yes, Ido,
Thank
show
you
us
so
your
much.
wine. Thank you very much. We're still drinking.
Wasn't
some.
sure. There it is.
Bye.
Cheers. Fun day, everyone. Fun day.
Bye.